Welcome to Leading with Artivism. Leading with Artivism is a live monthly interview series created and curated by Poet Gold in collaboration with Arts Mid-Hudson, featuring a diverse mix of artivists, artist activists who have taken up the charge through their art to highlight social issues. We invite you to ask questions and get an inside look at the hearts and minds of these courageous creatives.
Welcome, everyone, to our final show for 2022 of Leading with Artivism. I'm your host, Poet Gold. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank the Junior League of Poughkeepsie for their continued support of Leading with Artivism. Give a shout out to Melissa backstage, our stage manager, as well as Kristen back there. So thank you guys for your help. Our guest tonight is Amy Trompetter, a puppeteer, trumpeter, world theater historian, teacher, and community organizer. She founded Redwing Blackbird Theater in the late 90s as a workshop and performance space in the Hudson Valley of New York. Her roots are in bread and puppet. I said bread and butter. See, I'm hungry. Bread and puppet theater in the 1960s in New York City. She has taught, directed, and performed all over the globe. I had the opportunity to meet Amy back in 2018 when we collaborated on a project about Sojourner Truth here in the Hudson Valley. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up to the front of the room Amy Trompetter.
Thank you for that nice introduction.
Oh, you're welcome, Amy. Amy, am I pronouncing your last name correct?
Trumpeter.
Trumpeter. Okay, I am. Great. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a real honor.
No. It's an honor to have you here. I love your backdrop. But we've asked audience members to submit some questions. They may want to ask you, but I also put some together. And so I want to start off by asking you first, before we actually bring up some of your work, your slides, is what started you on your journey of being a puppeteer and a trumpeter? How did those two things come together for you?
Well, I did go to Berkeley during the free speech movement, and I worked at the Eamon Hennessy House, and I knew that street theater would be great for the kids in Oakland, but I didn't know how to do it till I went to New York City and found the Bread and Puppet Theater, doing work in Harlem, and then also for the Angry Arts Festival during the Vietnam War. And they put an ad in the newspaper. I went to the Joe Papp Public Theater and was very intimidated and said to myself when I went home that night, if I don't do this, I will have missed out on the whole trajectory of my life. And I went back and I was right. That was the trajectory of my life, the Bread and Puppet Theater, which is activist with giant puppets and cantastoria paintings and big scale and also small scale. And the messages always came from the impulse to make the world better or to do a good. All of our shows are for good and against evil. Some of our shows are good and some of our shows are bad, but all of our shows are for good and against evil. That was their early motto.
So when you say, I just wanted to get a good understanding for our audience members. When you say some of our shows are good and some of our shows are bad, can you expound upon that? What do you mean by bad? Versus good. You're talking about bad in the sense of the tension that may be in the world that you're trying to address, or what do you mean by that?
Oh, sometimes you can perform and feel that it did not work for your audience.
Gotcha. Oh, okay. So you mean literally bad?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're taking risks. I would say what I learned from Bread and Puppet is that the puppet tells you what to do if you're listening. Some people write scripts, like especially for actors theater, it's normal. And for puppet theater, it can be done. But the difference in Bread and Puppet is you have the idea, you build the puppet, but then you get the puppet going, and it's actually the puppet that tells you what to do. And if you're really tuned in, it's going to work. And if you've got too much mental push in your head that you're not listening, then that show could not work. That's what I would say. Right. So those are the bad shows where we impose too much of our preconceptions and aren't open, which we all know when you write poetry, all the arts, when you're painting, when you open up to what the medium or the moment is telling you, then you're on track. And that's where the ego fades and the thank goodness the truth comes into the work.
Absolutely, it's sort of similar to my approach as a teaching artist. I go in with a template and an outcome of what I hope to achieve, but I always open myself up. I believe that the student will teach the teacher how to teach.
Oh, that's so great.
You open yourself up to that. So let's bring up some of your slides, and let our audience members take a view of some of your work.
Do you want me to talk during them or not?
You can actually, if we can maybe watch about maybe 3 or 4 of them, if you can tell us a little bit about, the slide and the story behind it.
So this is a painting, and there's Punch. Punch and Judy is a show I did with a skirt as stage, and this painting shows the devil taking Punch to hell with 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie with an angel with a salt shaker shaking the salt on him. And I don't purport to know everything that this could evoke, but it's sort of like poetry that we know it's not good. Right? Something is amiss.
Right. This
slide one should be a little lower. So we can see the puppet. It's the stage with the skirt as stage where I put the skirt on.
Okay.
And I have the skirt on this box right in front of me, but the puppet is sticking out the top of it. But yeah. And there you can see the skirt as stage with the audience out in front of Redwing Blackbird Theater in Rosendale. Or this one could have been in Sinterklaas across the river, and it was. And so there I'm squatting down with my skirt as stage, and you can see the little red boots sticking out. Those are my feet.
Got you. Okay.
Then the dragon that I have right here in my hand that I showed you a second ago, that alligator, here he is the guy in my hands. And he says,
there once was a fellow named Punch. I ate him for lunch. Into my stomach he had to go. But I might let him out for the next show. Bye-bye.
So that's the end of that show I was doing, squatting down to really get close to the kids.
And what about Dragon?
These dragons are going to be in the Halloween parade that Gene Fleming is putting together for 6th Avenue for this Monday. And they're dragons of war that these activists in New York City have borrowed from me. And they're going to take all the generals and put them under the skirts of Mother Earth and say, enough, we need peace on Earth. So these are dragons of war.
And you mentioned that this is going to be in the Halloween parade in New York City?
Yeah, on Monday on 6th Avenue, and it'll be televised. It's Gene Fleming and the New York City Halloween parade that goes up 6th Avenue every year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's the Mother Earth that's going to swallow up all the bad and give us peace on Earth.
I love that thing, and give us peace on Earth.
This is a dragon that a lot of young people got into, and we went to the Italian American Festival last year and did a show in Kingston. But this year we went to Coney Island Boardwalk, and we had that red dragon high up on a stick and had Mother Earth. And again, we were taking gentrification, which is a problem in Coney Island right now, as it is in Kingston and Rosendale and probably Poughkeepsie. And we said, we don't need gentrification. We need fair housing. And we stuck gentrification under the skirts of Mother Earth and buried it. So that's our activism there.
Okay.
And here's Ubu Roi. Ubu, who's in a play that prefigured, this is serious, prefigured Hitler and Stalin, but a high school kid wrote about his physics teacher, so he made it funny. But in Ubu's belly, there's a clock, the nuclear clock, that says we're 100 seconds to midnight, which we are. So this war-making guy who, in the apocalypse, the sun turns red and the moon turns black, and then all these nuclear vessels are around him, and he's perfectly fine with that until he realizes in his belly there is a clock, a nuclear clock, and we all have that in our bellies. So this was a show we did as a sung story, cantastoria, which is a form that's in Sicily, cantastoria in Italy, in Germany, bongo song, bench singer. So you paint some pictures, and you in your mind you have a story, and you chant out your story.
Is that the last? Oh no, there's one more, right? Okay.
So these are big fish eat little fish. These guys, you can't see their tails in this particular photo, but just imagine you went down their suit and they ended up with a big fish tail. And there's little green fish on the table, which they stick in their mouths. So these big fish, who we know you are having whatever percentage of the wealth right now, and just eating, gobbling up the little fish. So it's true. We're using a lighthearted metaphor for a serious situation that we don't want to continue. We want to equalize the distribution of the wealth so that people can feed their kids and have a good life.
Excellent. So, speaking about the humor, what are your thoughts on using humor to change people's minds or ways, the way they think in your work?
It's an age-old tradition, like Punch in Punch and Judy.
Mm-hmm.
He's a funny guy, and he's very irreverent, and most every culture has one of these. Karagos in Turkey and Karagios in Egypt, who's a great-grandfather of Punch, who can say anything and get away with it,
Right.
and even be improper and say, he gets eaten by the alligator, Punch, and then he gets eaten by the alligator and he goes down in the belly and the alligator's so happy, but then in just 1 second, Punch comes out of the poop hole of the alligator and says, I was in the Rondout Creek and I just, I'm gonna make it, guys, don't worry. So we're being to this irreverent, but what we want is on that show, say no more gentrification. So we're balancing it, that he gives in with his lottery money to buy the big gated community house, and then the person who's lived there all their life scolds him and he doesn't listen, and in the end the alligator or the devil gets him, the alligator gets him. So there's humor in there, and there's also, I think every culture has that in their fairy tales and Native American stories, where the animals also take on persona, and you can just catch people in their heart a little bit off guard if you're funny, but then there's something quite deeply serious for us.
Absolutely. I think some of my favorite shows when I was younger on television were related to animals.
Oh, great.
And the animals, it was like fables. The animals told the story. The animal conveyed the message of what is right and what is wrong, versus your parents or versus your peers. You got the message through the animal, and you really at least I did. I responded to it. I wanted to be a good dolphin or something.
Yeah. Because they're so innocent, right?
Yes, absolutely. What is, I'm going to ask you this. It's actually, let me ask you this question first.
Yes.
And I think it's sort of obvious in a way based upon what you've been saying so far.
Yes.
What is artivism for you, and how do you feel it is reflected in the body of work that you do?
Well, I mean, it's two words, right? Art and activism. And so the vocabulary of the activism is the art making, I would say. The vocabulary wants to like blow a horn, blow a trumpet, go out into the street. Here's our little banner where we make the stage, the skirt. I don't know if we can see that.
Yeah.
And so that kind of activism is I mean, it's just the same thing as activism, the art making in my life decision. And I'm also not a person of words. When I was in Italy, they said she speaks through paper mache, not words, because I wasn't so articulate. Well, I was supposed to be speaking in Italian, so that was hard. But I feel like it's so deeply ingrained that it's hard to answer the question for me, because I take it for granted that the art making is the activism. That all, for me, the integrity is to make it accessible, to make it out of recycled materials, and to make it relevant to the moment that we're living in, a little bit dangerously so. that everyone might not agree, but I try to bring people through our commonality, our love for red and blue and painting or singing or storytelling, that when good triumphs over evil, and then you're not preaching, but it hits the heart in a certain way, and then you have a dialogue that you can keep going with, as opposed to the kind, I guess we'd say, activism, where you're shouting out your truth and you're not giving the person so much room for their own weaving around in there to find out where they agree with you or where they enjoy it. So I think it's a bigger palette that has a lot of entry points, as opposed to no more war, because someone could walk away and say, well, I have my own opinions. But when I'm not answering your question directly, but
no, you're actually I'm listening to your response and just reflecting on my own space and my own work as an artist. As you're opening up so much. I think the audience is probably appreciating the answer and what you're getting. So go on. You can go on.
Well, maybe that's it.
Okay.
And people are different on different days. I remember there was a man who didn't like bread and puppet ever, who came to us after a funeral of someone very close to him, and the show spoke to him so deeply. So we can also say people are coming to you at different times and in different moments in their life. So you want to keep the doors open to that right moment that they're going to come past you. It might not be the first or the second time, but that there's enough there of the joy of life that person would come back, and they might not agree with everything, but you're in a dialogue, even if you're not talking so much in words. Right. Like the realtor down the street who's charging way too much for his rent is laughing at Punch, who's, falling into the trap of gentrification, and the woman is, showing him what's really right, and it's funny. And he's laughing out loud at Punch getting in this gated community, which we have up the street, with a little swimming pool. He knows exactly where I mean. But he himself is doubling the rent on my friends who live on this street. And yet he's laughing at that. So I think there's hope there to say, yeah, we get it. Humanity is more important than the dollar. And we show it in the show, and it's fun. And then it doesn't attack that particular person or that particular transaction, but it warms the heart, and so the funniness and the rightness of it don't condemn someone or point a finger. They're with a puppet, right? So we can just keep going along with that. And
there's no, there's something that I read about your work where I don't know if it was a quote, but I felt like it captured what you do. It said, let your puppets do the talking.
Yeah. And sometimes they surprise me. Exactly. And I learn. Yeah.
Who has influenced you the most in your life?
Oh, definitely the Bread and Puppet Theater. And Peter Schumann is the man who started the Bread and Puppet Theater. And when he was 9 years old, he had to leave Silesia with his brothers and sisters and mom and dad and go up toward the North Sea and live in a little farmer's village with, basically, they gleaned the rye in order to eat. The rye that the farmers in that village let fall to the ground. It was too hard to pick up each little granule of rye. So the kids of Peter Schumann's family picked it up and took it home to their mom, who ground the grain and made the bread. And then at night they read grim fairy tales to each other, and they had their puppets, and they did their little puppet shows. But then when Peter Schumann came to the U.S. and the Vietnamese War was happening, which, I mean, he certainly saw things coming across the ocean from the difficulties of the Second World War. And he saw the Sicilian puppets of Papa Matteo, who was on the Lower East Side and then came up here to this area with Italian Americans. So he found big puppets that could do serious things. And my studio has a lot of, not just, these are easy to show you, but
Right.
as you know, with Sojourner Truth, there are 10, 12-foot tall puppets, and that scale, and the scale and the making it and then letting the puppet tell you how the show can communicate what was in your heart when you began making the puppet all came from the Bread and Puppet Theater and Peter Schumann. And I think it only came to him from being a refugee in the Second World War, because he already understood making it out of, make it out of cheap materials. Anything that you can find, like cardboard on the street is free, and cornstarches cost pennies, and you can get ripped old cloth from castaway bed sheets or whatever, and you can make all of your puppets and staging and paintings can go on materials that hardly cost anything at all. So I think that was a help, because it meant you don't have to wait for the grant. You can do it. You just
Right.
do it.
I like the way you say you don't have to wait for the grant. You can just, it's accessible all the way around. It's accessible. Amy, so what I'm picking up is that the subjects, because I was going to ask you, how do you pick the subjects for your puppet? So all the subjects that, when I visited your studio space and just
Yes.
the enormity of the puppets that you have, they came out of your relationship with Bread and Puppet Theater, or were they puppets that you just said, I just like Sojourner Truth, like I just want to do this person?
Well, there's 3 puppets in my studio right now that answer that question, I believe. There's a giant Sojourner Truth, and she was born just down the street at the Red Bridge, just before you get to Rosendale. That was the Hardenberg house where she was born. So I feel her presence very strongly there. And then Mama Nookwe was a Esopus Native American who had her council ring on the Rondout Creek, which is right behind my house. So Sojourner Truth, down the street, born. Mama Nookwe, council ring up the creek, the Rondout Creek. And she stopped the wars and signed the peace treaty with spit and gunpowder because she didn't have a pen. And she was the matriarch of war and agriculture, and could say, we're not losing any more of our young men. Take 3/4, take the major part of our land. We'll keep this little bit, and we'll keep living, but no more death. So she's just right up the creek from me. And then across the river at Bard College are the ashes of Hannah Arendt, who escaped Nazi Germany and would have been killed in the concentration camps had she escaped twice out of encampments. And she's been writing many, many books about speaking up. So her ashes are across the river. So I feel like I'm in a vortex, a triangle of these 3 women. They don't haunt me, but they inspire me. And I haven't done that show yet, but I have the big puppets here, and I'm working on it. And they're not letting me alone until I do that show. That's how I feel our relationship is here in my geography.
I can appreciate your statement that they don't haunt me, but they inspire me. Because oftentimes, when there's a spirit, a presence, people use the terminology that they haunt me, and when it's really their presence is trying to move you in a direction, to inspire you, to facilitate a change. Amy, what?
Definitely.
Huh?
I said you are a poet.
How is your journey changed in your life from a child to now?
Well, I know I was a devout Catholic from my very beginnings. Yeah. And that's what I was given. And I wanted to be a canonized saint because that was the highest you could be. Like when I was about 5 years old, that I was going to strive really hard. And going to Berkeley, California for college and the free speech movement introduced me to activism when those young men were killed for voter registration in the South.
Yes.
And I knew Mickey Schwerner's dad at Antioch when I was teaching there, and the necessity to to really examine the effects of the actions of this country became strong for me as a student from other students at Berkeley, especially, who had come back from voter registration in the South and began the free speech movement in Berkeley. And I wondered, how did they know? How did they know? How did they know when Kennedy was shot or when Martin Luther King was shot, also that it wasn't just all the truth was out there? How did they know this? Because I had an upbringing that relied more on what was passed from the news down to us. And I would say that was the turning point for me, from going along with whatever was in the news to examining it, came from fellow students during the free speech movement and was amplified by the Bread and Puppet Theater, especially when the Vietnamese War became egregiously wrong in many people's eyes, and we could stop it, I believe, with these giant parades and demonstrations. I don't think it would have come to the end as quickly had the people not been out into the streets. Right. So that was the effectiveness of it. And I think we need something right now, and it's a young generation who's got to live on an earth that's warming and the seas are rising and the storms are coming and the inequality is so intense, with people who have people who leave their homelands and have no place to live and no real shelter and food, and even the lack of food for major populations in this world. While we are able to eat, we know these things, and they're easily let's see, it's easy for us in some ways to eat and sleep and continue, and harder to say, wait a minute, and what can we do? And many things are ineffective, so what can we keep trying that would wake up each other and bring a better world for the young people who are just coming up right now? I hope that was the answer to the question. I kind of lost the question.
It's okay. It's you're great. I can appreciate what you're sharing, and I do have a question for you though in relationships to the youth, since you brought them up to the young adults that are out there, particularly the ones that are about to graduate, the ones who are first time voters. What advice or what encouragement or what could you share to them about where they are now, and maybe some ideas, some thoughts on moving forward? I know it's sort of like a big question, but are there any, if you could speak to your little self, so to speak, if you were 18,
nice,
what would Amy now say to the 18-year-old, to the 19-year-old, or the 20-year-old?
I think walk out of your private space, your sphere, your home, your cell phone, your media. Walk out from that into the society and listen to people and formulate your own points of view and articulate it in public in ways that you seek out. I think the only hope in this world is a lot of face-to-face communication and disagreement turning into compassion and agreement on some level that we haven't yet found, that we don't yet know, how we coexist more equally with the resources being shared on this earth, and to speak up even if you're not accepted for exactly what you've said, and then listen to what other people are saying and keep that flowing, keep the conversation flowing, keep the visibility outside of the privacy of your internet and household, out into the public square, and be willing to change, to be wrong, to acknowledge what's good in others when you might disagree with some part of it, but there's always something in a person you can find that's a place of agreement.
Mm.
The 106-year-old Kisi Mackay who lived here used to say, yeah, if it's just the loaf of bread that you've got in your hands in the supermarket and that's the only thing you've got in common, go in that direction. Go as far as you can with that. Make the bonds with our humanity, recognize that and let it grow from there. And I find that eye contact is a little hard when you get so used to cell phone, especially, I'll say this, the people who come up from New York City to Rosendale, I just don't see them looking to the right or left, but walking straight down my sidewalk. And I have to go, hello, because
Right.
we've been taught to stay private and safe. And
Yeah.
you can step out of the private into the public sphere and speak.
It's funny that you would mention that because a couple of years back, obviously prior to COVID, I was in Kingston and I was trying to find a location. And I asked someone, I said, do you live in the area? Could you tell me how to get to? I forgot where I was. Let's say Broadway, and they immediately said to me, "Don't you have a phone?" And I said, yes, I do. And then they said, well, why don't you look on your phone? And I said, well, why? Because I have you right in front of me. I think that's a much better interaction than me pick up a cell phone, which I may or may not know how to use in order to find my location when I have my human being in front of me. So it turned out we wind up going into the same restaurant. And lo and behold, I get to the location to do my performance. This person walks in.
What a wonderful thing. What a great
story. And we had such a wonderful human interaction at that point once he realized he's at the same place. And he said, I'm sorry I gave you a hard time. I should have just told you where you needed to go. And I'm like, it's okay, but it's that thing that you're talking about, to come out and to reconnect and have that human interaction, the piece of bread, the loaf of bread, the common ground. Great. That space, the common ground. And when you get that, you build from that. I think sometimes people think common ground is a denial of the self. It's not, it's a meeting place. It's a meeting place. Perfect. You're not denying yourself, but it's a meeting place. And Perfect. So, Amy, this has been a great conversation. What's next for you? I know you mentioned the Halloween. You're going to have some representation there with your puppets. Is it Monday? Monday's Halloween? Is it Monday?
Monday's Halloween. Monday. I'm not going to go to the city. They're borrowing my puppets. A bunch of activists in the city are doing that, which is great. And we just came back from Coney Island, where we did on the boardwalk and a big exhibit in the shooting gallery in Coney Island, where Bread and Puppet played long ago in the 60s in Coney Island. And I love being in the Hudson Valley, but I also would love to have an outpost in place that's as packed with people from all over the world as Coney Island is. But I mean, the doors are open. There's a museum here. I'm making it more and more full of puppet scenarios, and then to keep doing shows on Saturdays here between 4 and 6, 7, 6 now it's getting dark, open to the public. And we do Wednesday walks for Black Lives Matter in Kingston, but just keep expanding who's a network that would jump in and join us, or people do their own skirt as stage revolution, which is what this little sung story is about. So as I'm turning 80, saying, hey, young people, take this skirt. This is my stage. You don't need a permit to put the like when we were at Coney Island, you don't need a permit for a skirt that you're wearing. And the sticks are in my belt around my waist. And this stage goes up over my head. And the puppets go up there. I don't know what is on the camera here.
Yeah, we can see it. You're pointing up.
So I want a skirt as stage revolution, where a lot of people make a skirt. And I always, at the end of the show, divest and show the sticks and the little belt and the holder. And how the puppets have a little hook. And then I just reach down and get the puppets and bring them up. And I think that's a great, that's what Redwing Blackbird Theater would like to leave with people. That here's this skirt as stage revolution. Redwing Blackbird Theater, Skirt as Stage, Revolution,
Hmm.
where you walk out of your house, you've been at your computer screen, you leave it, you put on your skirt, if you can see this very well, you jump into your skirt, you put the you walk out your front door, your neighbors are waiting to hear you do your show, you put up the skirt, you do the Punch and Judy show, and then when you're finished, you dump the puppets in the street and invite them to do their own show. So that's, I think, a contagious thing that this Redwing Blackbird Theater in Rosendale, New York, can offer to people who want to come here, get materials, do it. I'll do something more online with that. And with
Okay.
our website, if we're nearing the end, I think, redwingblackbirdtheater.com. On our website, but that you're so welcome to come here. I so welcome you. And to take these materials from here and fabric and sticks and paper mache and glue and just try it out. And you don't know what's going to come out of the puppet's mouth. And it's always the puppet who gets blamed for it, not you. So you
Yes, yes, indeed. So, Amy, I want to thank you for being present with me tonight. I know that we can follow you on Instagram because I believe I've discovered your Instagram page. Is that correct, Amy Trumpetter?
Yes, someone is helping me with this to get it on the different social media places.
Okay.
So we're on Instagram now and a few other places.
But you have a personal website. How can people follow you specifically?
Okay, so it's the name of the theater. Redwing Blackbird Theater.com. And the tricky thing is theater is spelled ER.
Okay.
Like it could be spelled R. And then Redwing Blackbird is not the proper winged with a dash and all that. It's just simple words. Red Wing Blackbird Theater, ER, theater.com. I mean, theater spelled THEATER.com. It's a little complex.
Thank you. Maybe I'll take. I'm going to put my friend on blast, who's a wonderful sculptor, and you. I believe you've met her before, Sabrina Trochet.
Oh, yes, I have.
Yes, I think maybe we'll take a trip to Rosendale.
Oh, please do.
Just
please come. Come on Saturday afternoons, especially between 4 and 6, and I'll show you the puppet museum. We'll all go in there and do shows in the street, and it will be wonderful.
And have a blast. Thank you, my dear. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching Leading with Artivism. As I pointed out, that this is our last show for 2022. We will come back bigger and better even in 2023. And just to mention to you that we'll be sending out a survey and a questionnaire for those of you who have been following us and tuning in, just to get your feedback. And if you have any suggestions, please feel free. That's what the survey is for. I'm your host, Poet Gold. Thank you, Art Mid-Hudson, for collaborating, and Melissa and Kristen for helping me backstage. I appreciate you all. Good night, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful Thursday.